Today, I've got an important status report update on the Second Amendment Financial Privacy Act. This is a state-level bill that bans the use of a financial surveillance code first implemented by the IRS some 20 years ago for better tax reporting purposes. But now, of course, people want to expand that and use it to track the purchases of firearms, firearm accessories, and ammunition. We've got some really good news in this episode, but first of all, welcome and thank you for joining me here on the Path to Liberty. I'm Michael Bolden with the 10th Amendment Center, and this is the Fast Friday edition of the show for April 5th, 2024. First, a little background. A merchant category code from a report by CNBC is typically referred to as an MCC. It's a 4-digit number used by credit card companies to classify different types of businesses and identify the types of goods or services that a company sells. They were first mandated by the IRS in 2004, and currently the guidelines are maintained by an organization called the International Organization for Standardization. Now, right up here on the screen here, if you're watching, we've got Internal Revenue Service Bulletin number 2004-31. It was first, these merchant category codes were first proposed by the IRS back in 2003. They were made official in 2004. Now, some people want you to believe that this is totally for your safety, but remember, when government and supporters of the monster state tell you that it's for your safety, it really means so we can control you. And here's how CNBC puts it, status. If you've ever been called by your bank asking you to confirm prior purchases that were detected as potentially fraudulent, this was by way of an MCC. Credit card companies use the intelligence from these codes and data to find aberrations or patterns in consumer purchases to prevent things ranging from fraud to human trafficking. Of course, we want to stop fraud. We want to stop human trafficking, but we don't want mass warrantless surveillance, whether it's done by these people and then handed off to the government or by the government itself. Priscilla Sims Brown, president and CEO of Amalgamated Bank, you should be familiar with them by now, not good guys, told CNBC's Andrew Ross Sorkin at the Evolve Global Summit, this is a couple years ago, that the banking and financial industry can and should use these codes to track gun purchases in order, of course, to help prevent acts of gun violence, because gun control stops bad guys, right? Now, here from a post over on X that we did, you should follow us at 10th Amendment. This will all be linked to in the show notes. Everything that I'm referencing here will be included over in a blog post over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. So the IRS proposed these codes back in 2003. They want to make it easier to do tax reporting, of course. Now, taxation is theft, and we don't like the IRS, so let's set that aside at the point. But it was optional to start using these once it was implemented in 2004. But the IRS created all the original categories, so it only exists because of the IRS. So we shouldn't be surprised that over time, what starts out at one thing always gets expanded to something else. We shouldn't be surprised that gun grabbers today now want to create a new code for firearms, firearms accessories, and ammunition to make sure that they are marked differently through the credit card and banking system so they know that it's not just a sporting goods store, that you're definitely buying a credit card. So we shouldn't be surprised that they want to use this opportunity to conduct surveillance on firearms purchases. Now, around 30 senators, there were some efforts to try to push this through. Heavily from Amalgamated Bank was one of the leading voices on this. American Express basically said no, and maybe if all the credit card companies aren't in on it together, if they aren't all saying yes to it immediately, it's not going to happen. So there was some pressure from these private businesses. But then in September of 22, on the 1st, Elizabeth Warren, our great friend to liberty, Elizabeth Warren, and I think maybe 20 or 30 other senators sent letters to American Express, Visa, MasterCard, maybe Discover as well, pressuring them, hey, we want to get this thing implemented. Here from the first paragraph of the letter to Amex, we write to urge American Express to support the creation of a new merchant category code for gun and ammunition retail outlets, and to seek answers to reports that the company has obfuscated efforts to create such a category, which would be an important step towards ending financial system support for gun trafficking, gun violence, and domestic terrorism. Now, of course, they think most gun sales really should be classified as gun trafficking. So there was some efforts to try to get this implemented. It didn't happen. Then there's this letter sent by a bunch of powerful people in government on September 1st, 2022. And the very next week, of course, they're announcing, yes, we're implementing this. What a surprise how that all kind of connects. And here from Free Range American, the Geneva-based International Organization for Standardization, ISO, announced September 9th, 2022, that it had approved the plan to implement a new merchant category code to track retail gun sales. Second Amendment proponents worry that this will create a corporate-controlled list of gun owners or a de facto gun registration list, which the government is prohibited from doing by law. Government loves saying, oh, we're not doing it. We're just paying someone else to do it. They do this on surveillance and collecting location data. Why wouldn't they do the same type of thing on your natural right of self-defense? Here from NPR, of course, a nice choice quote from a gun grabber. Today's announcement, this is back in 2022. Today's announcement is a critical first step towards giving banks and credit card companies the tools they need to recognize dangerous firearm purchasing trends. Of course, I really want to emphasize that they're calling this a first step. They have other plans. We have some hints, and I'll get to that in a moment. So dangerous purchasing trends, like a domestic extremist building up an arsenal, and report them to law enforcement. That's from John Feinblatt, one of the usual suspects, president of Everytown for Gun Safety. Again, this is a first step. NRA ILA put it like this. Amalgamated Bank noted that they intend to create a software algorithm that will use these merchant category codes, quote, to report suspicious activity and illegal gun sales to authorities. So step one is getting the code implemented. Firearms category, if you're selling if you're a retailer for firearms, firearm accessories, or ammunition, or a combination, you will be given this specific code from the credit card companies. Of course, people can pay cash, but still, many people want to use cards. We want to allow any time you restrict people's options to conduct business, that cuts back on the amount of business that they're going to conduct. So step one is to implement the code. Step two is an algorithm to automate the tracking of purchases and then reporting to government. So this gets pretty crazy here. Describing how the gun control scheme would interface with the federal government, the New York Times explained it like this, quote, banks could then either allow the flag transactions or block them and file suspicious activity reports with FinCEN, that's the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, which would ideally also create a system to quickly forward that information to local law enforcement and the FBI. Now, to some people, every purchase of a firearm is a domestic terrorist or an extremist. So if you allow them to do this, just because you think they're only going after the bad guys, maybe consider the Patriot Act, which was supposedly only supposed to be used for the terrorists. Going further, NRA puts it like this. Those promoting this scheme are proponents of firearm and gun owner registration and advocate against firearm owners' privacy, period. Therefore, it should be assumed that the goal of this program is to share all collected firearm retailer MCC data with government authorities and potentially private third parties that may include gun control organizations and anti-gun researchers. I mean, they're literally telling us that they absolutely want, step one, implement the code. Step two, create the algorithm to track stuff and auto-report things. And then step three, well, the New York Times is telling us they want to work directly with FinCEN, local law enforcement, the FBI, lots of reporting. Of course, over time, they may start out just reporting the most extreme situations, and they'll probably want to cite a few things, how we stopped this crazy person, so then people get on board, but then they're going to start reporting everybody. And I think, even though I disagree so much with what the NRA does and their approach, I think they're absolutely correct there. Once you open that door, just like John Dickinson, the penman of the American Revolution, he warned in response to the Stamp Act in 1765, even if you think it's a tiny thing, once you establish what he called the detestable precedent, people with power will always use that precedent to do more and more and more over time. So that was in 2022 when they got this code after the pressure from the people in government in the Imperial Senate sent this pressure letter that all of a sudden they finally relent and say, yeah, we're going to create it. But there was a pretty heavy backlash right off the bat in early 2023, where a number of states started working on this Second Amendment Financial Privacy Act. I don't think it's a great name for the legislation, but let's go with it. Makes it easy to understand what we're talking about here, where they ban the use of these firearm-specific merchant category codes in regards to any retailer based in the state. We covered this in some detail in our State of the Nullification Movement report, which you can find for free at 10thamendmentcenter.com/report. I think it's around page 60, 61. It's a couple of pages on this. But really what's important for here this episode today is that a number of states passed them into law. We've got Mississippi, Idaho, North Dakota, Montana, Texas, and Florida all passed a version of the Second Amendment Financial Privacy Act into law in 2023. Now, before any of them even got signed as law, this started creating a headache for the credit card companies that wanted to implement this firearms merchant category code. Here from Reuters, March 9th, 2023. Top payment networks, including American Express, MasterCard, and Visa, said they have paused work on implementing a new sales code for gun merchants, citing pushback in various U.S. states on concerns about improper tracking of consumer behavior. So literally, as soon as they started moving forward in a handful of states, I think Idaho was one of them at the time, they said, whoa, this is going to create inconsistency. We're not going to be able to implement this. Let's hold off. A MasterCard representative said on, Thursday, March 9th, 2023, whatever the exact date was, said via email that such bills would cause inconsistency in how the code could be applied by merchants, banks, and payment networks. Quote, "It is for that reason that we have decided to pause work on the implementation of the firearm-specific MCC," said MasterCard representative Seth Eisen. And Reuters notes that American Express and Visa representatives also cited state bills as driving their decision. We got the same from Discover shortly after. So the TLDR is they wanted to implement this firearm tracking code, merchant category code. There was pushback through the state legislation saying, well, we're just not going to allow you to use it in our state. And before any of them even got passed, they started backing off. So we said at the time last year, I did a podcast on it around April or so of 2023. Mike Meharry did an article on this as well. We basically said this should be a green light to really push forward aggressively, because if just a handful of states considering the legislation gets them to pause it at least, what we have to do to get it completely shut down is we need a bunch of states passing it into law. So 6 of them during 2023. And the good news for today is we already have 4 more states. So we're up to 10 that have passed versions of a Second Amendment Financial Privacy Act. Most recently, there's Wyoming Senate File 105, which goes into effect on July 1st. In Indiana, House Bill 1084 also goes into effect on July 1st. In Utah, House Bill 406 goes into effect on May 1st of this year. In Kentucky, House Bill 357, which went into law without a signature from the governor there. What a surprise. We didn't expect a signature there. But they would have probably overridden a veto. So I think that just let it go into law and not fight it. But that one goes into effect 90 days after the session is closed. I'm not sure of the exact date, but sometime in June that'll go into effect in Kentucky. And just this week in Tennessee, Senate Bill 2223 was given final approval, and that is headed off to the governor's desk. So maybe we'll get a 5th state already this year in 2024. And then we're also tracking similar legislation in places like Ohio, Louisiana, Iowa, and just most recently, Alabama, probably a few others as well. So it's very positive news. I hope it's encouraging. I hope this was educational. More important than anything, I hope you learned something, and I hope this maybe gives you some ideas of ways that we can undermine all kinds of other stuff. But if anything, if you're interested in this specific thing, you definitely want to get on the horn and get in touch with your state representative and state senator if you're not in a state that have passed one of these, and urge them to do the same, because we really, really need to hammer this home and nullify this plan into oblivion where it belongs. Again, I really appreciate you spending some of your time with me today. If you want to help us get this kind of information out to more people, nothing helps us do this work more than the financial faith and support of our members. You can join us for as little as $2 a month over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. If you got a couple of bucks of that dirty government fiat, please consider throwing it our way. I'd be very grateful for any support. Otherwise, you can also help us spread the word by leaving reviews on Apple Podcasts, smashing like buttons, subscribing, getting notifications, leaving comments. All those things can help trigger the algorithms, especially the mainstream platforms, and tell them to show us to more people. Again, I really appreciate you being here. I hope you enjoyed the show. I hope you have an awesome weekend, and hope to see you next week here on the Path to Liberty.